and prayer. Well, a most hearty welcome to you all on behalf of Dr. M. Thomas Study Center. Distinguished person of the day, Dr. C.T. Kurien, Sri K.M. Thomas, the moderator of the session, Dr. Jessa Satyal, and I see on my screen most distinguished scholars and elders, and I'm not mentioning the names. A very warm welcome to all of you. A very warm welcome to all of you. Dr. M. Thomas Study Center is proud to welcome you all to this discourse in honor of Dr. C.T. Kurien in connection with his Navadi celebrations. Dr. C.T. Kurien had long...
I can't take your call now, please. I'll call you back.
Okay, thank you.
A long mutually enriched relationship with Dr. M. Thomas. Further, Reverend V.T. Kurien, father of Dr. C.T. Kurien, joined hands with Dr. M. Thomas in resisting the emergency imposed by the then Prime Minister of India, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Reverend Kurien served as the convener of the Clergy Forum for Human Rights under the patronage of Dr. M. Thomas during those dark days. As I understand, Dr. Kurien's latest book, Wealth and Welfare, an expedition into real-life economics, was published in 2012 when he was 80 years young, not old. It provides an it provides accessible overview of economics, but questions the value of an economic system based on pure pursuit of profit, a vision close to Dr. M. Thomas' thought. No doubt, it is most befitting gesture that we meet together for a conversation to explore the thrust and emphasis in the present context. Happy that Dr. C.T. Kurien is present here, accepting our invitation for a response. We most heartily welcome you. Dr. Gabriela Dietrich and Dr. Bas Willinga were close associates of not only Dr. M. Thomas, but of the wider group centered around Dr. M. Thomas. We remember their visits to Pennama Bhavanam on many, many occasions. Happy that Madam has joined us this meet, and we welcome you most heartily. Sri K.M. Thomas, ideologue, activist, writer, many qualifications you can attribute, who closely followed Dr. M. Thomas during his lifetime, is with us. We welcome you, Mr. K.M. Thomas, sir, most heartily. Dr. Jessadas Atyal is the designer of this program, and he will moderate the session. Dr. Atyal needs no introduction, and he is very actively involved in M. Thomas Study Center since his return from United States. Our most hearty welcome to you, Dr. Jessadas Atyal. I am given to understand that many prominent persons have joined and many more to join. And Dr. Atyal will later brief on the presence of the scholars later, I think. Before I hand over to Dr. Atyal, a word about Dr. M.M. Thomas Study Center. The center was established in the year 2016 by Tiruvalla Ecumenical Charitable Trust, a trust instituted by Dr. M.M. Thomas himself during his lifetime. The center pursued to highlight the vision of Dr. M.M. Thomas in the wider secular society and have the contemporary reading of M.M. thought. And we feel proud at this moment really to have the presence of Dr. C.T. Kurien and the most distinguished participants in connection with a very august occasion. Welcome you once again. Thank you very much. I hand over to Dr. Jasida Satya.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Philip and Thomas, for this words of welcome and introduction. Professor Philip and Thomas, as all of us know, is a secretary of the charitable trust founded by M.M. Thomas. He is a former professor of physics at Marthama College. He had also served as the general secretary of the Kerala Council of and a leading lay thinker and a theologian in Kerala. So we just want to welcome him also to this gathering. Thank you all, especially wishing a happy birthday to Dr. C.T. Kurien once again. His birthday was 2 days ago, day before yesterday on weekend. And there was a large gathering that evening to celebrate his birthday. And some of the friends here were also present there on his birthday get-together. That was organized by his former students at Madras Christian College, colleagues at the Madras Institute of Development Studies, friends, and others. For a group like this, there's no need for an introduction on Dr. Kurien. Almost all of you are familiar with his work and on. He was one of the he is one of the leading economists in our midst. He holds a PhD in economics from Stanford University in California. And for long years, I think almost 3 decades, he served as a professor of economics at Madras Christian College. So his students came together to greet him on his birthday, day before yesterday. And the senior-most student was the former General Secretary of CPIM, Prakash Karat, and also the chairman of Hindu and Ram, and others were there. So he has a great distinguished group of students at Madras Christian College. Before he retired from there, even while he was serving there, the legendary Malcolm Adisheshaya came back to India from France after serving as the Deputy Secretary General of UNESCO. And under the initiative of Dr. Malcolm Adisheshaya, the Madras Institute of Development Studies was started. And Professor Kurien was invited to be the director of MITS. And there he continued for quite a long time, supporting research and publications in economics, especially of Tamil Nadu and rural economy of Tamil Nadu. And so he has a great, he had a great career, and he continues to be active, and we are really thankful for that. Now, gathering on his birthday evening, mostly of secular academic scholars, his colleagues, former professors, and students, and all. When I look around today, I see that a good number of them come from a different background. Many of them, many of us are primarily persons of faith, clergy, social activists, Christian workers, students, SCMers, and all. So probably this could be representing today's gathering represents yet another dimension of the life and work of Dr. Kurien. And I just mentioned the name of Malcolm Adisheshaya. Probably the two persons that some of us consider as mentors to Dr. Kurien are Malcolm Adisheshaya and Dr. M.M. Thomas. Both persons of deep faith, but yet took radical positions in public life. Today, just after I finish my comments, we'll have the paper of Dr. Gabrielle Dietrich, and she is talking in detail about C.T. Kurien as a person of faith and how his faith has been a factor in his academic life and public life. So we can say that Dr. Kurien's academic life was informed by his deep faith that he did not show or did not speak about much on public platform, but that was underlying and abiding concern behind his work. The radical of him informed the radical positions he took in. And lastly, I will also say that he was a forerunner in the greater cooperation between the left movement and people of faith that has emerged during the last 1 or 2 decades in much of India, especially in Kerala, because traditionally there's been a hostile relationship between people of faith and the left movement. In most parts of the world, antagonist relationship. The situation changed in India during 1 decade or so, as the forces of religious nationalism, communalism, sectarianism, violence is coming up in a big way in much of India, especially in Kerala. The left political groups and the sections in the church could build closer relationship, and there are a number of instances of that we see during the last few years, especially the last 5 years of the LDF government in Kerala, which is now being continued. And so we can see that while Dr. Kurien did not directly play any role in the more cordial relationship between the left and the people of faith, it can be said that he was a forerunner in combining, and he could see common ground between faith and ideology. And his faith was informed by his political, radical economic political positions, and also his politics was informed by his faith. So that way, today we celebrate a pioneer, a visionary, a person of faith, and we wish him all the best. And we look forward to many more productive years of his life. He has written about 25 books so far, and he continues to write. Especially he is doing book reviews in the Hindu and Frontline. And we have great scholars here, Gabrielle Dietrich and Mr. K.M. Thomas, others who will be speaking more about him. And so I will conclude my words here, and I'll invite Dr. Gabrielle Dietrich to speak. But before that, I just want to say a word about her also. I'm sure that virtually all people sitting here are familiar with the person of Gabrielle Dietrich. I believe she and her husband Bas Vilanga came to India in 1974, accepting an invitation from Thomas to be with him at CISRs in Bangalore. And that 1 year led to a lifetime in India. And they have been here ever since. Of course, Bas sadly passed away a couple of years ago, but Gabriella continues to be active. I don't know of anyone else, at least sitting here, who is spiritually, emotionally, and academically close to Thomas as Gabriella is. So she has been moving really close to him, and he was a part of all her ventures in Tamil Nadu Theological Seminary, the Center for Social Analysis, women's studies, and other issues. And she has equally been close to Dr. C.T. Kurien. So she was the most appropriate person for us to get for this occasion. She has sent her paper, which we can show you as she is reading it. And on behalf of all of you, I warmly welcome Dr. Gabrielle Dietrich and ask her to speak.
Unmute.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Dear friends, and dear Siti and Susie, this is a very important moment for me, you know. It is really a wonderful occasion, and I'm very thankful to the Thomas Study Center for organizing this. And of course, I'm happy that I have been asked to speak here, but at the same time, I'm also speaking with apprehension, because, you know, when one follows all the ways in which CT has been honored during these days, one is a bit in awe. And especially, I mean, we are no economists or anything of the kind, so we are strictly speaking as non-experts. I will partly reading this out, and I will partly speak freely. So I think it is not necessary to show the text.
Okay.
I think
okay.
it's better if I just speak.
Okay.
I have to say that this year was not entirely correct. We came in 1972. You know, that we started. So it was 1972 till the end of 74 that we worked with. In the beginning of 72, we came, so altogether we were for 3 years with the CISRS. And it was a very life-changing experience, I must say. And of course, we knew Thomas as a chairperson of the World Council of Churches, and that is how we came to the CISRS. And he very soon referred us to Dr. C.T. Kurien to understand about the Indian economy. And we visited him in the Madras Christian College, and we learned also a lot of from him in the seminars which CISRS was organizing, and also ECC and different occasions. And the main message which we gathered from him was again and again that the rich are getting richer and the poor poorer. And there was a causality somehow. And there was a sense of urgency that this had to be changed. And the third resource person, which I want to add here, is also our friend Ajit Roy, whom C.T. will certainly remember. So it was Thomas and C.T. and Ajit Roy who had the greatest influence on us. And Ajit Roy, as many of you may be knowing, he was the editor of the Marxist Review. He was a heartfelt Marxist. He had nothing to do with Christianity or any other religion. He was totally secular. And he left the Communist Party after the split in 1954. And he worked for the unity of the left from the outside. And excuse me, there is a lot of background noise. I find it very difficult, and pictures are coming up. Can that be changed?
Those who are not speaking, mute your mics. That would be good. Those who are not speaking, can mute.
Yeah. Thank you. So we started celebrating, it is the 100 years jubilee of Ajit Roy, and we started celebrating that year at Deepavali in November last year. And we had several on the internet to commemorate him. And so I think this combination of MM Thomas and C.T. Kurien and Ajit Roy was something very significant in terms of an influence on us, and it helped us immensely to understand the Indian society. There were also students at the time who were trying to have a creative Marxist vision, and they were also studying Marxism, but at the same time they were doing, it was called the Free University. They were also going to the north of Karnataka, and they did some development and organizational work there. So it was not just a quest for theory, but there was always practical involvement also. This was not directly related to CISIS, but all these people related to each other and came together under this umbrella in some way. There was, I want to say something, my second point is about being part of an unjust system. That was the time which worked up towards the emergency. There was a seething discontent in the society in 1973-74. It was the time when the Dalit Panthers were formed, inspired by the struggle of the Black Panthers in the United States, and the manifesto of the Black Panther, of the Dalit Panthers, was discussed in Religion and Society in the Journal of CISIS. There was extraordinary unrest during that time of most different kinds, like a mutiny of the Provincial Armed Constabulary in Lucknow, comprising of 20,000 cadres. And there were numerous working class struggles in 1973-74, like the textile workers, the jute workers, a 3-month strike of the junior doctors, even then the doctors striked, and huge movements took place in Gujarat and in Bihar. Educational institutions were affected, and attacks on ration shops by students and as well as by the working class took place. The famous railway strike took place. That was gigantic. 17 lakhs of workers striked for 20 days in a row in May, and thousands of workers were arrested and dismissed. All this and more led to the declaration of the emergency on the 25th of June in 1975. And the slogan Garibi Hatao, with which Mrs. Gandhi has swept to the polls, resulted in massive slum evictions and sterilization campaigns under the leadership of her son, Sanjay. And all this started to resemble a campaign of Garib Hatao. You remove poor. This brought many different streams together, as we all were Democrats of different shades. Due to the emergency, the Indian jails were full beyond capacity. Gandhians and Naxals found themselves incarcerated together, and even the churches were challenged to take a stand. The CISIS was mentally on the barricade, and Siti Kurien on the ground of his Christian faith and his unwavering stand for democracy and social justice stood with us. Unlike some of the Gandhians, who under influence of J. Prakash Narayan were too negligent about the Sangh Parivar, the different leftist positions were very clear on this account. So the situation was very clear to all of us. In CISIS, there was great respect for Dr. Malcolm Adeshishwar, it was already mentioned. And some of this got kind of transferred to CT, and we also appreciate very much that CT's books, though scholarly, were rather readable for non-economists. And at the same time, it was obvious that he was widely respected by the fraternity of academics, and he tried hard to make them more critical about their methods. He was widely respected for his competence, even by people who did not share his zeal for social justice. This is how he became the director of MIDS. Despite his career, Siti Kurien always kept a very simple lifestyle. He was rather frugal. He lived in a small flat with Susie and the two daughters. And I'm told he never owned a car, though of course he had transport from his job opportunity in his work context. But privately, he rode a bicycle, even an Adaya. I once met him struggling with his daughter's college admissions. And it struck me that he would never have pulled string. Despite all this, he seemed to harbor something like a personal guilt feeling within the capitalist system, as if he felt personally responsible for that, for the fact that it was still there. He once said to me, "Gabriele, it is terrible. Whatever our opinion, but we are all capitalists, part of the system. We all have bank accounts and get interest. We invest in bonds for old age insurance and things like that. And it means indirectly we are supporting the system." This registered in my mind, and I wanted to convey this. I think we should never forget that. We are all responsible, we are all implicated. Now, my third point is about the question of faith, secularism, and identity. I think this is very important because the cultural question has become so much contested. And of course, in Kerala also, this whole question of identity politics is very much has come very much to the fore. Now, as it was already mentioned by Atyal, Siti Kurien and his wife Susie are devout Christians, and all these brothers are from a pastor's family. And after retirement, when the Kuriens were living in Bangalore, one could always be pretty sure if one happened to go to the Sunday service in St. Mark's Cathedral, then the Kuriens would, in all likelihood, turn up. I'm not a very regular churchgoer, but Siti and his wife were always very regular. And I always found it was a very comforting presence. Because it's this combination of faith and the secular, which is so important, which is non-judgmental in its interaction, but feels free to share the faith in a situation where it is warranted or required. I once saw the text of a message which Siti Kurien gave in this retirement home where they are now living. And he was sharing about the fact that he was doing yoga. And I think he wanted to encourage other people to also do that and to do breathing exercises, which is very much to the point in this time of the pandemic. And of course, many people from the Christian community will feel squeezy about this and think, oh, this is a Hindu habit and we must not adopt this. So he explained, he said, when you say, oh, you must not think of which religion it is. You can think of shalom. So then all the vowels are present. And of course, it is very fitting because shalom, the verb shalem in Hebrew, it means also to make. And that is what peace is all about, to make whole. And of course, this verb is also sometimes used in the context of remitting the debts and abolishing an indebtedness or loss of land. And so I found this extremely meaningful, I must say. And the interesting thing is also, while Siti and Susie came from a very homogeneous background and have been known to each other even from very young age, their daughters took very different avenues in their life. I get the impression that they are what one would call daring daughters nowadays, because they broke through all these barriers with which they are living. Their marriages have been inter-religious and inter-community and inter-ethnicity. So it is a very secular option which they have taken, and a very an option in different directions. And I think it is something very wonderful that a Christian couple produce such daring daughters. Now, Susie, of course, I want to mention it here. She had given up her profession as a teacher also. And she spent her life for the family. She brought up these daughters and she supported Siti and she read his proofs. And he always thanked her in his books, but he never said her name. So he also helped me, that I have to very thankfully record here, when I had to apply for Indian citizenship. Because when one does it, it's a huge process. It takes many years and one needs recommendation, character certificate and all that. So MMT gave me a character certificate and Siti said, I write a recommendation. So when I came to MIDS to get my recommendation, he said, Gabriela, I must tell you something. You know what happened? I was busy with this thing and a colleague came and I told him that I was writing something for a friend who applies for citizenship. And that colleague said, what? How can she apply for citizenship? How will she be a citizen? She will have no caste. So how can she be a citizen? So I think Siti was very upset about this and he was indignant and he said, just imagine this is the attitude even in an institution like the MIDS. And so I think this is very significant, you know, for the kind of attitudes which he tried to promote and for the kind of attitudes which he wholeheartedly rejected. Now I come to my next point, and this is now more shaky ground for me because I'm talking about economics. So I am talking about not the book Wealth and Ill-Fare, but about what it tries to promote. So Wealth and Ill-Fare, it has a subtitle, Expeditions into Real Life Economics. So this is really something where the methodology of economics has been questioned very much. We were already using his book on the economy quite a bit because that book helped us very much to understand different modes of production and to make them intelligible. And it also helped people to sustain that vision that the capitalist mode of production can be overcome, that there can be life after capitalism. I hope that expectation is still valid. So this was all not easy within a world which was also full of socialist rhetoric, be it in India or in Eastern Europe or China. So it was a situation, I mean, in India, everybody spoke about socialism, but in many other places also, when they spoke about it, it was often state capitalism, which was really going on in those countries. At the same time, it was the critique of economic growth as such, which came up at that time. There was a Brundtland report and all that. And it is only now that in the time of the melting glaciers and rising water levels, droughts and floods, and of course in the time of pandemics, that the realization that all is not well dawns and is admitted, and alternatives become very urgent to contemplate. But it is not at all clear what is the way out, if any. It is in this situation that wealth and welfare expedition into real-life economics has become very important. It is an attempt to break the spiral of wealth and welfare by using real-life economics, recognizing the role of intermediaries. It critiques an economics based on thought models with less need realities of material circumstances. CT points out the inequalities in land ownership, intermediation, middlemen and marketing, and also asymmetric information. Now, this is a very burning issue, no? Among the students nowadays, that not everybody has a computer. Only the privileged can converse on computers as we are doing right now. And the mass of people who are trying to get education, they don't have access to this technology. So this places different actors in different power position and leads to different distribution of wealth. The increase in inputs leads to the taking of loans against interest and growing indebtedness, which has particularly led to farmers' suicides and loss of land. Apart from this, there's also the competition between seed and fertilizers companies and the interests of the farmers, who are losing control of what they are growing and how it is marketed. The conflict over mandis, which is now going on, and the minimum support price for agricultural goods. This conflict is raging continuously. The present situation of this farmers' movement has exposed us to this. And the farmers are still beleaguering the borders of Delhi since last year. And it is a living example of such contradictions. It is highly significant that in the mobilization of the farmers, the women farmers have come to the forefront in large numbers and have demanded recognition as farmers. That is fairly new. No, all these women were slogging in the fields and running the households, and nobody thought they were farmers because they do not own land. Not only that, even landless laborers now have been supporting the farmers' agitation because they lived, their livelihood is also badly affected by the new farm laws. Not only that, chemicalized capitalist farming has come under a lot of critique, and organic options are becoming more popular and fetch better price. This, of course, leads to higher levels of poisoning among the poor because they have to buy cheaply, as the healthier option is not affordable. However, the poorer sections are on the barricades for other reasons. There have been widespread struggles, especially by Adivasis in forest areas, for example, in Odisha, which are these areas are intruded by capitalist developments for mining operations of bauxite and other valuable minerals, sometimes even diamonds. No, it's incredible what are the priorities. The struggle of the Adivasi population in Niyangiri in Odisha has so far succeeded to keep the holy mountain protected from mining operations, but many other places are also threatened. Though the Forest Rights Act acknowledges the right of Adivasis over the minerals under their land. And this has been documented widely for Odisha. There are innumerable struggles going on there against all this mining. And this kind of situation has also led to a lot of militarization in a state like Chhattisgarh, where Salvajudum and Operation Green Hunt have let loose enormous violence on the Adivasi population. Once we went ourselves with NAPM to Chhattisgarh, and we got under the pressures of these kind of paramilitary forces, and they were shooting into the air and they were trying to drive us into the police station and all this. So we got a clear experience what it must be for the local population to live under such circumstances. It is quite unimaginable in ordinary life. Now we have to keep in mind that the farmers' agitation is not the only one which challenges the capitalist system. Even before that, there have been the struggles against 3 labor courts. It's not only 3 farm laws. Even before, since long, we are struggling against 3 labor courts for the working class, which were trying to set aside 40 labor laws, you just imagine, for which the working class has been fighting since decades. So this is about to be taken away, and due to the struggles to the resistance, this number of laws which are being done away with is now down to 29 or 30 or something like that. But we have to be clear, these labor courts are still hanging over our heads, and they have never been accepted by the unorganized workers, because 80% of the working class is unorganized sector. So both these struggles between the farmers and the unorganized sector labor, these struggles are very, very closely connected. And at the same time, there are ecological struggles for healthy river systems and against big dams, which have been going on relentlessly since decades, despite no significant victories. The struggle for the right to life and livelihood, water and forests, it is at the heart of the attempt to sustain life on Earth. At the same time, the powers that be are making efforts to keep in control. The new president of the US, unfortunately, also thinks that it is of utmost priority to renew the nuclear arsenals as nuclear technology proliferates. The fallacious doctrine of nuclear deterrence has ceased to work, and it is now transformed into a new arms race, as Ajit Roy always anticipated. Continuous economic growth drives the competition to fly to other planets to get another option. And also the mining of the ocean floors is a big program of development, which leads to unimaginable destruction. Also, people are working on scientists are working on artificial intelligence. It is developed to substitute living labor and to switch off human consciousness. The United Nations, very fortunately, have recently declared the possession of nuclear arms as illegal. But how do we get rid of these things? There is no mechanism of implementation. And can we put all these nations in front of the criminal court in The Hague? Or what are we going to do? These are very urgent questions. The pandemic has paralyzed the economy as well, as people's mobility, except the migrant workers and the peasants and some of the movements. The government uses the situation for the so-called enhancement of the central vista, a symbol of the strangulation of democracy, a mausoleum for the constitution, which is constantly hijacked by the communal forces. But the people's movement and the spirit of the youth are bouncing back. It reminds us of the struggles of the garment workers from the sweatshops at the Lower East Side in New York in the beginning of the last century. This was a huge struggle, and it finally resulted in having March 8th as International Women's Day. And that resonates in a song which is called Bread and Roses. And so that last line of the title, the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, that is from that song. And so the leading question in front of us practically is how to overcome the capitalist exploitation, wealth and ill-fare, with the option of sharing of life's glories. And that doesn't mean riches and money, but it means bread and roses, very simply. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That was quite a profound presentation of both the person and the thought of Dr. C.T. Kurien. Thanks for that presentation. And we'll be taking questions afterwards. Our next speaker is Mr. K.M. Thomas. നമ്മുടെ പ്രസന്റേഷൻ എല്ലാം ഇംഗ്ലീഷിൽ തന്നെ ആകണമെന്നില്ല, മലയാളത്തിലും ആകാം. മിസ്റ്റർ കെ എം തോമസ് വളരെ ഫെമിലിയർ ആയിട്ടുള്ള ആളാണ്. സ്റ്റുഡന്റ് ക്രിസ്ത്യൻ മൂവ്മെന്റ് സീനിയർ സെക്രട്ടറി ആയിരുന്നു 1970s. പിന്നീട് ഡൈനാമിക് ആക്ഷൻ ഗ്രൂപ്പിന്റെ പാർട്ടായിരുന്നു. പ്രോഗ്രാം ഫോർ സോഷ്യൽ ആക്ഷൻ ജനറൽ സെക്രട്ടറി ആയിരുന്നു. കേരളത്തിൽ അറിയപ്പെടുന്ന ഒരു സാമൂഹ്യ ചിന്തകനും എഴുത്തുകാരനുമാണ്. മിസ്റ്റർ കെ എം തോമസ് C.T. കുര്യൻ സാറിനെ നല്ല പരിചയമുള്ള ആളാണ്. മിസ്റ്റർ കെ എം തോമസ് ഇപ്പോൾ സംസാരിക്കും. അദ്ദേഹത്തിൻ്റെയും പോയിന്റ്സ് കിട്ടിയിട്ടുണ്ട്, അത് ഞാൻ ഷെയർ ചെയ്യാം. യെസ്, ഓക്കെ. വാം വെൽക്കം മിസ്റ്റർ കെ എം തോമസ്. Mute, not mute. Yeah, sure.
Can you hear?
Yes, yes.
Good evening to you all, especially to Kurien sir and Susi Kochemma. I am honored to be part of this program as we honor Kurien sir in his 90th birthday. Let me begin with 2 occasions when I had conversations with Kurien sir. The first one was at Kottayam Hospital, where V.T. Kurien Achan was passing through his last moments. If my memory was correct.
Could you speak closer to the computer or phone? Could you come closer and speak? Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
You can hear now?
Yes.
Yeah. The first one was at Kottayam Hospital, where V.T. Kurien Achan was passing through his last moments. If my memory goes correct, I think it was in 1977. He was put under a ventilator. There were 4 or 5 people in the room, including Kurien sir. I appeared in front of the room and everyone turned towards me, wondering who this unfamiliar face was. Then I introduced myself that I had connections with Kurien Achan. In 1973-74, I was Kerala Secretary of the SCM of India and stationed at Pattam SCM Center, Tirunelveli. Kurien Achan was the principal of KUT Seminary at that time. He used to be an invitee to the SCM Center to take classes to students at regular intervals and also a guest speaker to special occasions. Achan was a loving father figure, really a guide, always took principled position, soft-spoken but tough with people in matters of justice. I'll stop this digression to Kurien Achan in a moment. Of course, he deserves to be remembered and celebrated on his own merit, not necessarily known through his illustrious sons. I moved to Bangalore, National SCM, but returned during emergency period, not to Pattam, but to Tiruvalla. Tiruvalla is a shining spot in the history of social action. The team out there was up against the emergency regime. Kurien Achan was also opposed to the emergency regime. We at Tiruvalla were campaigning and
it has gone mute.
Hello?
Yes, it's. Yes.
Can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Yeah. The team out there, Kurien Achan was also opposed to the emergency regime. We at Tiruvalla were campaigning and organizing students, youth, women, clergy, etc. At the level of clergy, we formed a Clergy for Human Rights, and Kurien Achan became its president, A.P. Jacob Achan secretary. I was a sort of assistant helping them doing all the legworks. I'll come back to Achan again later for a brief reference. Let me come to this second occasion I had to interact with Kurien sir. It was in 1990 at the Sophia Center, Kottayam. There was a workshop on historical socialism against the backdrop of the collapse of Soviet Union. In that workshop, we had 3 resource persons. Any problem with the audio? Hello? Hello?
Yes. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, it can be heard. Yes, continue.
Yeah, there was a workshop on historical socialism against the backdrop of the collapse of Soviet Union. In that workshop, we had 3 resource persons, including Dr. C.T. Kurien. The others were Sudipto Kaviraj and Michael Taragan. Dr. Kurien had 2 lectures. After all the presentations, there was a recap session on the final day morning. I happened to be the person to sum it up. Commenting up on it with a sense of humor, Dr. Kurien said that the ideas he presented in his lectures appeared to him in a better light with the recap. Those words were intended only to encourage me. However, I was really pleased and excited. But when I put it into a paper to be published, I sent it to him for correction. His portion he deleted entirely and written a fresh one. Yeah, here I stop my personal interactions with Kurien sir. Now I get to the main body of my presentation. Dr. C.T. Kurien is very special to ecumenical communities and social action groups. His inputs and studies of poverty and human misery within the framework of economics provided a knowledge base. It was part of a new narrative, catalyzing the self-articulation of the poor and the excluded. Many personalities contributed to that new knowledge base during the first half of 1970s and around. Dr. M.M. Thomas's Salvation and Humanization, Father Carpen's faith that Father Carpen's Vishwasathil ninnu Viplavathilekke, Nayan Koshi's cast in Kerala churches, and many more literature in the lights of liberation theology across the globe, all influenced a new generation of youngsters in Kerala and elsewhere in the country that led towards literary and cultural engagements. All fields of study and disciplines were challenged from the underside. I repeat, all fields of study and disciplines were challenged from the underside. Each discipline's expanding horizons blurred the boundaries. For instance,
switch off your audio, John says.
Hello, sir?
Yeah, it's okay.
I didn't hear you.
I didn't say anything. Please go ahead.
It's not for you. Continue.
Okay. All fields of study and disciplines were challenged from the underside. Each discipline's expanding horizons blurred the boundaries. For instance, Dr. Kurien argues social relations and human beings are intrinsic to economics, while explaining his own definition of economics in his book, Wealth and Ill-Fare. Let me quote from one of his presentations in the PSA get-together at Mahabalipuram, titled Understanding the People's Struggles. It's a small paragraph. I am quoting it in full. The quote begins, "Very often, we think of struggles as perhaps demonstrations or some other way in which attention is focused on particular issues. This certainly has its validity, but I don't know whether you have retained that for the vast majority of the people in this country, life itself is a struggle. For the vast majority of the people in this country, life itself is a struggle. So I would like to concentrate on this part of the people's struggle and then try to show the relationship between this natural day-to-day struggle and the particular forms of struggles you are associated with." And he goes on to substantiate his claims. I am picking the idea, life itself is a struggle. And of course, he cautions us not to confuse it in any mystical sense. To those who are under poverty, he claims being human is a struggle. That is, to subsist as a living organism is a struggle. The economic term poverty obscures the struggleness of being. By struggleness, I mean the condition of being in struggle. I may use struggleness hereafter. Struggleness, I mean the condition of being in struggle. The attribute of struggleness for the very existence of the being in the world within the framework of economics, the academia would flounder in fixing its boundaries. I don't mean Dr. Kurien is seeking multi or interdisciplinary approach. That kind of inference would miss the point. He, in fact, tears down, destroys the layer that is apparent to the established economics. What is apparent is a kind of frontline defense, formulated into such words as poverty, inflation, deficit financing, price rise, etc. He tears down the apparent and penetrates into the hidden and unseen. That is, he in fact makes struggleness a pivotal element to economics. Though this poses a crisis to the official version of current economics, this is laying down a new knowledge base to the ecumenical and social action collective. In the name of deficit financing, inflation, price rise, etc., what happens is resource transfer through which exploitation and exclusion create a condition of being in struggle. Economics is exposed as a denial of access to resources and the destroying of the ground on which the vast majority is rooted or find their subsistence. Dr. Kurien endows legitimacy to the politics of resistance, the exploited, of the exploited, and the excluded. That is why Dr. Kurien is special to the social action collective. This being so, let us mark this phase of ecumenical social action collective as a phase of epistemic upsurge. Bear with me for the jargon. Definitely, those era, it was an epistemic upsurge. Now let me mark the period again with a second aspect, and I phrase it as a leap of faith. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in their midst. You know who said that? It is through him that God's presence felt to many. That name is problematic in many parts of India these days. titled one of his books, Risking Christ for Christ's Sake. It is not the name who that what matters, but what matters. What? I mean, it's a little confusing. What matters is to identify with those for whom life itself is a struggle and those taking on the powers that be. Then only we know what it means to be with Christ being in the midst. M.M. Thomas was about to be arrested during the emergency. Even V.T. Kurien was under the radar of intelligence agencies. I said that he was the president of Clergy for Human Rights during emergency. Vatican banned Father Carpen's book, and his clergyship always remained under threat. M.J. Joseph was a black sheep to the church, a disgrace according to them. Mar Paulos has had his problems with his church. We youngsters in those days were in the company of such fearless and amazing exemplars. Though the name of God is problematic, the name of each individual in the collective, wherever they are in different layers of collectivity, each and every name is important. If I start naming, there it will be in hundreds. K.J. Jonathan, Aloysius Fernandez, Tom Kocheri, T. Peter, K.J. Jacob, T.J. Peter, Babu Kumaravam, Devalan, Dr. Annama George, D. Joy. Just for the sake of naming a few who are no more with us, there are 10 times many more to name. Many are living handicapped these days. Others don't know where they are. A motivational speaker says that everything you want is on the other side of fear. In the leap of faith, Kierkegaard underlines leap. Without leap, there is no faith. We were always conscious of the politics of the discourse of otherworldly theology. K.J. Jacob used to tell a little story. A man was sitting in front of his hut. A dry day morning, having the benefit of shining sun, his wife from behind warning him that his kids were sleeping on empty stomach. Please go and get something from somewhere, she said. In the meantime, an Upadeshi appeared before them and passed on a tract titled, Innu Nee Marichal Evida Pogum. Reading the title, the man raised his towards the Upadeshi and said, Innu Njan Marichillengil Evida Pogum ennadana Upadeshi enda prashnam. We were always with that person who said, if I don't die today, where will I go? Of course, nothing against the mystical or contemplative. We only insist for what is historical, what is at hand and around, purposefully to engage with, so that Christ's presence is felt and bear witness to. Let me conclude with my third and final point. What are the implications of the struggleness of being in the world? Such persons exist on the threshold of suicides. Hundreds of thousands of suicides takes place every year. We know that. We know the data and material factors that force them to commit suicide. But that is not the main issue. In such conditions, even if they survive, the ground on which their agency of selfhood fixed would be ceased to exist. As the ground to stand on ceased to exist, we see their faculty to think also destroyed. As a result, they are targeted objects of political, religious, and other social forces. They could be turned to anything: mob of violence, hate campaigners, persons of dehumanistic ideologies, and so on. They are the ones, those being fed into as warriors of totalitarian regimes. Hannah Arendt's book on Eichmann in Jerusalem unfolds how the thinking faculty is put out and one merely become a cog in the machine of bureaucratic regimes.
Could you please conclude?
Yeah.
Could you please conclude?
Yeah. While summing up in the light of the life and mission of Dr. C.T. Kurien, I would like to restate 3 points. Firstly, the 70s and 80s marked an epistemic upsurge that provides a ground to hundreds of social action groups to emerge from and upholding the vision for a new humanity. Secondly, such a knowledge upsurge should be understood in the context of a leap of faith. Thirdly, the idea of the struggleness of being could be understood as a facilitating ground for tyrannical or totalitarian regimes. MM used to say that every generation has to fight for its own freedom. We have to fight for it now again. One word to Kurien sir. Though the opportunity to interact with you was very little to me, your influence on my thinking is immense. I am looking forward to a time I can meet you at Puttangurish for a handshake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So those were two profound papers, not only dealing with Dr. C.T. Kurien and his thought, but also covering the struggles for justice now happening in our country, which was very close to the heart of Dr. Kurien. And so now it is the chance of Dr. Kurien to speak, both to respond to the talks as well as to speak what he would like to say. Sir, to unmute yourself and you can speak. Dr. Kurien. Yeah. Can you unmute Dr. Kurien?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Let me start with the apology. We had a long electricity failure here, during which it was impossible to do anything at all regarding our group here. I missed a great deal of what Gabriela said and of what almost entirely of what Mr. Thomas said. And so I will not try to respond to these. I will, in very simple words, place before you my own position, what I have been trying to do. Let me start with a simple example. Even those who are not students of economics will be familiar with this supply-demand curve diagram. Demand curve sloping down, price on the vertical axis and quantity on the horizontal axis. The demand curve sloping down to say that if price is lower, more will be bought. And the supply curve going up, showing that if you want more, you will have to pay more. But think of it for a moment. We do our transactions usually with merchants. And a merchant will give you more at a lower price, or will give you at a lower price if you are taking more. Think of the marketing that you do for fruits or whatever it is. What is the error here? The error is the diagram is concerned with production. And so it is true that if you want to produce more, there will be more will have to be paid. On the other hand, as I said, if you go to the market, the merchant you are dealing with will tell you, okay, sir, if you are willing to take a whole dozen, I'll give it to you at a lower price. The point being that that diagram and the economics that it represents does not have a place for merchants. Although in real life, most of us are always dealing with merchants. Now, this is the problem of theory. It abstracts from real life to make a point. And I felt that that kind of theory will not help understanding of economic problems. Let me give you just one more example from physics. We know from ancient days that an apple, if it falls, it will fall down because of gravity. But then we have examples of things going up and up as the satellites are doing. An aeroplane goes up and flies without coming down. These are realities. Again, what is often missed is that theory abstracts from real life situations to have its own methods of analysis. I felt that that is not the way to understand economics. You have to look around, you have to observe life as it is being led. And so my fight with economics started. Mrs. Gandhi was fed up of hearing complaints about poverty. And so she took up the Garibi Hatao slogan, abolish poverty. And the fifth five-year plan was drawn up to abolish poverty. And what did it say? If growth increases, poverty will be eradicated. If the cake grows big, everyone will have a bigger share. But that is not what has been happening. Growth has been increasing. For example, in our own country, from the 3 to 4% that we used to have to 7 and 8%. And let's be fair, some reduction in poverty has happened. But at the same time, inequalities have increased also. Globally, this is happening. And you will all recall the struggle of the ordinary people against the top 1% or the top 0.1%, which is amassing everything. Now, I have therefore taken that position. And all my writing has been based on that premise. I often see this happen in theology too. Theologians, understandably, have worked out categories about God and man and everything. And very often, though, it forgets how things are happening in life. I remember telling my close theologian friends who were at one stage talking about the need for dialogue with people of other faith. And I said, all that is happening is monologue about the need for dialogue. So I have raised this sort of questions, and that is about all that I have done. And some of you may have listened to the presentation that my colleagues did, professional colleagues did 2 days ago. Even there was some exaggeration about my role, but then I had to figure out how to sum it up. And I said, I told my students, if you want to understand an economy, ask 3 questions. Who owns what? Who does what? Who gets what? And this is the kind of economics that I have been dealing with down to earth, very much so, and in real categories. Thank you very much for your patience. And I must thank the Study Center for organizing this meeting. I did not know anything at all about the Study Center, did not even know that there was a study center like that. It is only after Jesudas mentioned this that I came to know about it all. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your personal reflections on that. We will have a brief time of discussion now. We are a small group. At the start, I would like to invite Dr. Dr. Varghese George to speak briefly. Dr. Varghese George is the president of the Ecumenical Charitable Trust founded by M.M. Thomas. He's a professor of at Marthama College, and he had invited Dr. Kurien to come there. And Dr. Varghese George is also the National General Secretary of Janata Dal, so he can speak now. Yeah.
Das, can you hear me?
No?
Das, can you hear me?
Paranjo.
Yes, yes.
Moderator, H. Das, Professor C.T. Kurien, my dear friends. I am extremely happy to have been asked to respond to the presentations in the webinar held in connection with honoring Professor C.T. There are two types of economists. Economists holding the values of capitalist establishment. But there were other economists who were concerned with the problem of nation building. Malcolm Adisheshaya, A.K. Sen, M.L. Dendawala, K.N. Raj, C.T. Kurien, and M.A. Umman, and others. Professor C.T. Kurien has always been concerned with the question of growth with justice. The post-colonial generation in our country was fascinated by the Nehruvian concept of economic growth. But the fundamental question put by Professor C.T. Kurien was, does this growth reflect reality? In India today also, the most crucial question now is the growing inequality. As Professor Kurien has said just now, recent studies have shown that though there is growth, 1% of our population has appropriated the growth results of the last decade. In earlier times, the political parties in their annual sessions were raising such issues of redistribution, land reform, literacy, health. Now, mainstream political parties are silent on these issues. But we have to build political agendas based on inequality. Can we build a linkage between the farmers' movement, the people movement, and new politics of people's movement, farmers' movement, and workers' movement? So in the absence of the mainstream opposition for a just and participatory society, can we build a politics around the farmers' movement? To overcome the expansive process of capitalist accumulation, Dr. Gabriela speaks about the sharing of bread and roses. But for this, we have to address the question of ownership. Who owns the resources? The state has to be brought to the interest of the people by urging the state to legislate for land reform, for labor welfare, universal literacy, and universal health. Thus, growth with justice. To achieve this, the poor has to be brought to the center of politics. In liberation theology, we speak about God's preferential option to the poor. As KMT said, the poor are looking at us. As KM Thomas said, the poor are looking at us. The mainstream political parties and non-party people's movements to help them to have dignity of human person. Let us commit ourselves on this occasion to affirm our solidarity, our strive for such a society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Varghese George, for focusing sharply on the issues that are most relevant before us now. We also have Nalini Naik with us. Nalini Naik needs no introduction to this group. Could you speak for 2 or 3 minutes or bring your greetings? Muted if you can unmute yourself.
Dr. Naik, may please unmute yourself.
Yeah, need to unmute. Is it difficult to unmute? Yes.
Sorry,
yes.
I was taken by surprise, but happy to do this because I'm a great fan of Christy Chan. And what shall I say? I met him through the Free University days when he was one of those economists who actually sat with us students through several hours, explaining to us this economy. And I remember at that time, he told us about how to look for who owns, who does, and who gets, well, in different terms. So over those years, of course, I grew to be friends with the family. Subsequently, because John and I then worked together and then met his parents in Trivandrum and got closer to meeting him on a more friendly basis. But as Gabrielle and Katie Thomas have also said, he always inspired us because he helped us to look at our realities. While we were working in the fishing community, and all this informal sector, which of course in those days was not taken very seriously. Christy Chan's books helped us understand how to look at contexts in which we were. And we grappled with these issues all along. And I think, of course, finally, this book that he wrote more recently, but already a while ago, on growth and wealth and ill-fare was really something that helped in this present time, because in this present time, while there's a huge process to think that there is no alternative, here he helps us to believe that if we persevere, an alternative is possible. So I'm always grateful for this fact that he has brought so much theory so simply to us to understand, as Gabrielle has said. And as she also said, the person that he has been, both he and Susie Cheji have been so warm and welcoming and always ready to chat. It's not like you're speaking to a great theoretician and you have qualms about speaking with them, but in a very humane and concerned way. This humanity I have always appreciated. Thank you, Christy Chayan and Susie Chechi, for just being yourselves and inspiring us, and wish you much on this wonderful birthday and the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nalini, for those words of reflections. We can think is that if there's anyone who wants to raise a point or ask a question, this is the time for that. If anyone has. Or we can allow the speakers, if they want to make any concluding comments, or Dr. Kurien would like to say anything in conclusion, or we can conclude now. It seems there are no questions or comments, and we have 6:30, so we can conclude now. Will the speakers want to say anything? Gabriel or KMT or Dr. Kurien? If you let unmute and speak. Do you want to say anything, KMT?
No, thank you.
No. And Gabriel?
I don't want to say anything, but I want to sing Bread and Roses for all of you, that song, which is nowadays a song of International Women's Day, but which speaks of the struggles of the affected people and which has this hope that that sharing will be possible. As we go marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 lofts gray, are touched by all the radiance that the southern sun exposes. And the people here are singing bread and roses, bread and roses. As we go marching, marching, unnumbered women dead are crying through our singing their ancient call for bread. Small art and craft and music, their parched spirits new. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we go marching, marching, we battle too for men, for they are women's children, and we must build them again. Our lives shall not be wasted from birth until life closes. Yes, it's bread we fight for. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we go marching, marching, we bring a better day. For the rising of the women is the rising of the race. No more the drudge and idler, and the toilless one reposes, but the sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses. I think that's it.
Oh, that was sweet. Thank you very much for that. So we will conclude now. Thank you all for being here. And I also want to thank the Marthama Darshana Vedi for providing the platform for us. And I also thank Mr. Shaji Lucas and Professor Dr. Noble Abraham for offering the technical support. And thank you for the M.M. Thomas Study Center for organizing this event. Conclude with the Lord's Prayer. But before that, I just heard that Father Stan Swami's health has taken a turn for the worse, and he is on ventilator. So kindly keep Stan Swami in your prayers. He seems to be not doing well, and is on ventilator. So shall we conclude with the Lord's Prayer? Our parent who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day
our
our
daily bread.
Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive our trespassers against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the
Yours
kingdom,
is the kingdom,
the power, and the
and the
glory,
glory
forever
forever
and
and
ever.
ever.
Amen.
Amen. Okay. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you, City Kurien sir. And wish you again a happy birthday.
On behalf of MMTSC Study Center, once again, our sincere thanks to all of you. And we greatly appreciate the presence of Dr. C.J. Kurien. Personally, I couldn't meet him on many occasions. It's a great privilege for us to be with Dr. Kurien this evening. And we wish you all the blessings in the years to come. And we honestly hope that your views would further strengthen the people of India. Thank you very much, sir, for your participation and kind message.
Thank you. Thank you all.
And Madam Dikshit, many times I have met you at Pandama Bhavana. Last,
Yes.
yes.
Oh, you're talking to Gabriel, huh?
Many times we have met at Pandama Bhavanam, you know. Many occasions I have been there to listen to you and Dr. Vaspilingya. It had been a great privilege. And we are fully aware of the very close relationship between Dr. M.M. Thomas and Dr. Bas and Madam. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Gabriela and KMT, Paris George, all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Das, shall we close?
Yes.
I don't